but next week we have one on the importance of being earnest, and that's going to be the last one. So then after that, you can concentrate on your paper and wrapping up your paper and the exam. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. Um, if that's not okay, I mean, I can add a discussion just for you if you feel like you're missing out on something. But like I said, after the 7th, we're not going to be meeting for class. You'll have your final exam, and that's pretty much it. I feel like that's enough. What else did I want to go over? Let's talk about discussion number 8 for this week. You should have already turned in discussion number 7, which was due the post on last Friday, and the responses were due yesterday. So if you haven't done that, do get going with that discussion, number 7. That one should be completed at this point. So discussion number 8 is the one for this week. And it says, what social ideas seem to be prominent in the works of Romantic period writers? So, we're thinking back to the last unit. What are the prominent elements of the works of Romantic period writers? Use 2 pieces from our unit and explain how those signal a changing society. So you can choose whatever pieces you like. What are the changing elements of the time period? And how can we see those through the pieces of literature that we read in the Romantic unit? So I don't think that'll be too hard for you to do. That's kind of general question. And that one's due this Friday. There's only 2 more left. So at the end, we can see the end of the tunnel, right? Hopefully. All right, today I want to review a little bit about Act 1 of the importance of being earnest. I did get called in to test. Oh, let me put this up here. I did get called in to monitor and help with the STAR test last Thursday. So I couldn't meet with you, but hopefully you either read and or watched the importance of being earnest on the video that I provided. It's an older version of the play. It's a very good version. It's just sort of old-timey from the 1950s, so like 60 years old. I have a better version, but I can't share it with you. I can only play it live in class, and it's a more more recent film. I don't want to say modern because it's still set in the Victorian times, but I think we'll just continue with the one that you started watching because you're already familiar with who the characters are. But if you have Amazon Prime, there's a good version of The Importance of Being Earnest. It's got Reese Witherspoon plays Cecily, and who is it? Judi Dench plays the aunt, the older lady, the mother of Fairfax, Lady Bracknell. So if you get a chance, you might enjoy watching that performance. I think it's very well done. So I want to switch to just a few things that I asked you to look for and that we'll continue to look for in the play. We're going to watch together today Act 2, which isn't terribly long. It's a fairly short play, but today we're going to delve into Act 2. You should be looking for satire. It's a story of a bunch of wealthy people who are not busy with their wealth, they're busy with their social status and their social interactions. And I think that in a way we can say that's a hallmark of the Victorian times. The wealthy people who have benefited off the backs of the poor through their factories or whatever position they have in society, an inherited title, etc. They don't really spend a lot of time worrying about business or the day-to-day type material wealth and how to grow it. They just enjoy their lives. There's more leisure time for people like that in Victorian times. There's not leisure time for poor people. They have to work, they have to go to the factory, they have to, provide for their family and try to keep their children from dying. But the upper crust gets to live in places like these estates, and they make these elaborate gardens, and they have, so much time on their hands that they create drama. And this is really the first time that we start to see that in society, because up until now, people don't have all that much free time. And if they do, they were generally learning and doing, you know, valuable things like that. We do see an element of education in, especially here in Act Two, that we'll see today. Cecily is studying with her teacher, Miss Prism, and I should put her on the list of characters, right? She's a minor character, but I'll put her on here in case you're keeping track. Miss Prism is her tutor, and she's sort of superficially learning languages and not really paying much attention to it. Cecily's more interested in her journal writing and keeping up with all the gossip and what's going on and all of that sort of thing. So society is represented by Oscar Wilde here in this upper class, and he's making fun of it clearly. We see these topics of satire. You can see these from the very beginning of the play, but you should continue to track them as we go through and look at Act Two and Act Three, because they continue throughout. So satirizing marriage, you'll notice that people decide to get married in this play very quickly. Oh, hello, what's your name? Oh, you're nice. Let's get married. And he is satirizing that. So he's not trying to portray life as it was in Victorian times. He's sort of putting that on hyper speed, and he's using that Victorian manner element to make fun of things like marriage and how randomly they decided to get married. If you were of the upper crust and you had a name like Earnest, then you were fine with me to marry. There's, Gwendolyn is all about I just always love the name Ernest. And so she wants to marry somebody named Ernest. And Wilde's obviously making fun of the reasons why wealthy people get married. Social status, of course, Victorian morality, what things are improper, what things are proper, and so on and so forth, and gender roles. Probably to us, the characters seem, especially Jack and Algernon in Act One, seem a little effeminate. And that's a feature of gentlemen in this time, not worried about work or physical labor. They're just worried about, their gloves and their morning coat and, presenting themselves for tea. So Oscar Wilde's making fun of all of that. All that stuff is being made fun of in this play. I did list also some concepts to track. There's a PDF that I hope that you looked over, and I put it in the Google Classroom and also on Blackboard. But I kind of dumped everything right here when I knew that I was going to have to test, so that it would all be handy for you right here. But this PDF kind of walks you through the characters and some of the elements of the play in terms of, basic concepts and symbols. Some things won't be more obvious until Act Three, because everything kind of comes to a surprising conclusion in Act Three, dramatically, of course. And so things you should be watching for and maybe making notes on, so that you can start to get some ideas about thematic statements. Deception, we know right from Act One that Jack Worthing has an identity in the country and he has an identity in the city, and he keeps them separate so that he can sort of like escape one and go to the other and live sort of like a different life. So he created a brother that lives in town. He's from the country, where he's Jack Worthing, and he created an identity for when he goes to the city, Earnest. And so sometimes he's out in the country, he's getting bored, whatever, he wants to go to the city. And so when he says, I have to go visit my brother Ernest, and then when he's in the city, he's Ernest. And Algernon, his best friend, is the same way, except he's created a character called Bunbury, and Bunbury lives in the country and Algernon lives in the city. So this idea of identity and deception is clearly based on, sort of the whims of those two men. They get bored, and so they create another identity and go to another place. That is not something that the working class can afford to do or would even think about doing. So Oscar Wilde's kind of making fun of that element of the upper society. City versus country, of course, we can see that with Act 1 takes place in the city. And so we have Ernest and Algernon, and then they go to the country, and we have Jack and well, Algernon in this act pretends to be Ernest coming from the city. So there's like a little bit of an identity shift because Algernon decides to go and kind of muck around and make drama by pretending to be Ernest coming to visit from the city, which nobody is expecting out in the country there. The hypocrisy of the wealthy, I think, is pretty obvious. City versus country, I talked about that. Wit over truth comes from the PDF. And you'll notice that it's more important to be clever than it is to be honest in this play. And that's I don't know if you know the word earnest. There is a word that means sort of like honest and hardworking, the word earnest. So there's a pun even in the title here and with the name of that character, Ernest Worthing, who is a made up character, which is not Ernest. So the whole thing is, you know, witty and not truthful. And of course, love. At the end, there are, you know, two couples, and you can kind of see even in Act 1 that they're starting to gravitate toward each other. Ernest is in love with Gwendolyn, and he's trying to get the approval in Act 1 of Lady Bracknell, who is in charge of her, and trying to make sure that it be okay for him to propose marriage to Gwendolyn. Algernon falls in love with Cecily when he goes out and pretends to be Ernest out in the country. And we'll see that part in Act 2 here today. So I think if you have this in your notes, you can take a screenshot, or I'll put a screenshot in the Googler. It might help you with your notes. Questions before we start? Is there anything from Act 1 that was confusing for you? I did put a couple of terms. You need to know what a dandy is because that's why they're all dressed up in their clothing. You need to know that Cecily is a ward, and that Jack is, you know, sort of like her guardian. And then double entendre, that is a term that you might already know, but it's sort of like a word that has a subtext. And usually that subtext is sexual or romantic in nature. So those you should have already all looked up. All right, I'm gonna play Act 2 and then we will talk about it a little bit. At the end of Act 1, this is the scene at the end of Act 1. This is Algernon. And Algernon they all need something to do. So what he decides to do is he's just heard Ernest give his address in the country to Gwendolyn. Here's Gwendolyn. And he says, you should come sometime to see me in the country because he's trying to, you know, wheedle his way into a proposal with her. And he's just given her his address, and Algernon wrote it down without Ernest knowing. So Algernon is also going to go out into the country, but under the disguise of Ernest, because when Ernest goes back to the country, he is Jack. So hopefully that makes sense. If you read Act 1, I think that makes sense. So we're going to pick up at the beginning of Act 2. Let me turn off my earphone thing. Make sure that the chat's on. Last week I made a huge mistake in my AP class and they couldn't see the video, so I'm going to enlarge it and then hit play. So I'll stop it at the end of Act 2 and we'll talk about it a little bit, and then that will be it for today. Let me know if you're having trouble.
Yes, Miss Prism?